The wooden chair felt cold beneath me as I sat with my hands folded in my lap like a good little wife. Benjamin sat across from me at his lawyer's table, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his smile wide and confident. He looked like he had already won. Maybe he thought he had. "You'll never touch my money again," he whispered to me, just loud enough for his lawyer to hear. His voice carried that same tone he used when he told me I couldn't buy groceries without asking first, or when he explained why I didn't need my own credit card anymore. He looked proud, like a hunter who had just caught the biggest prize of his life. Veronica sat in the gallery behind him, her perfectly manicured fingers resting on her designer purse. She leaned forward slightly, her red lips curving into a smile that made my stomach turn. "That's right, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. She called him sweetheart the same way I used to, back when I thought our marriage meant something. Back when I thought the man I married actually existed. Dorothy, Benjamin's mother, sat beside Veronica like they were old friends planning a tea party. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her cold blue eyes looked at me like I was something dirty she had stepped in. She had never liked me, not from the day Benjamin brought me home 8 years ago. I wasn't good enough for her precious son, she always said. Not rich enough, not classy enough, not worthy of the Foster family name. "She doesn't deserve a cent," Dorothy said, her voice carrying across the quiet room. She smiled when she said it, the same smile she gave me every Christmas when she handed me a gift card to Target while giving Veronica expensive jewelry. Even before the affair, Dorothy had been planning my replacement. My lawyer, Mr. Peterson, sat beside me shuffling through papers. He looked nervous, like he knew we were about to lose everything. Benjamin's legal team had 3 lawyers, all from the most expensive firm in the city. They had briefcases full of documents showing how I had never worked, how I had no skills, how I deserved nothing more than basic support. They painted me as a gold digger who had trapped their poor, innocent client. Judge Hawkins, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and graying hair, had been listening to their arguments all morning. She had a reputation for being tough but fair. She didn't smile much, and she didn't seem impressed by expensive suits or fancy lawyers. But even she looked like she was ready to rule in Benjamin's favor. "Your Honor," Benjamin's lead lawyer said, standing up with a thick folder in his hands, "my client has been more than generous. Mrs. Foster has no work experience, no education beyond high school, and no assets of her own. She lived a comfortable life for 8 years without contributing anything to the household income. A modest monthly allowance is more than fair." I wanted to laugh. No work experience? I had managed Benjamin's entire social calendar, organized his business dinners, and handled all the household management that kept his life running smoothly. No education? I had a marketing degree that I never got to use because Benjamin convinced me I didn't need to work. No assets? That was because every time I tried to save money or start my own account, Benjamin found a reason why I couldn't. But I sat quietly, playing the part they all expected me to play. The weak, helpless wife who didn't understand money or business or how the real world worked. I had been playing this part for so long that sometimes I almost believed it myself. Benjamin turned to look at me, his dark eyes full of satisfaction. He thought he had broken me completely. For the past 6 months, since I discovered his affair, he had been preparing for this moment. He moved money around, hid assets, and made sure everything looked like it belonged to him alone. He thought I was too stupid to notice, too scared to fight back. Mr. Peterson stood up slowly, like he was walking to his own execution. "Your Honor, I have one final piece of evidence to present on behalf of my client." His voice shook slightly as he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a white envelope. "Mrs. Foster has prepared a letter for the court's consideration." Benjamin's lawyer looked confused. They hadn't been told about any letter. Benjamin frowned, his confident smile fading just a little. Veronica shifted in her seat, her perfect posture becoming slightly less perfect. Dorothy's cold eyes narrowed as she watched Mr. Peterson walk toward the judge's bench. Judge Hawkins took the envelope and opened it carefully. The room was so quiet I could hear the paper rustling as she unfolded the letter. Her eyes moved across the page, reading silently. At first, her expression didn't change. Then, slowly, her eyebrows began to rise. She read for what felt like forever. Benjamin's lawyers started whispering to each other. Benjamin himself was staring at me now, trying to figure out what I could possibly have written that would matter. He still looked confident, but there was something else in his eyes now, something that might have been worry. Judge Hawkins finished reading and looked up at everyone gathered before her. Then, something amazing happened. She started to laugh. Not a polite chuckle, but a real, deep laugh that echoed off the walls. She laughed so hard she had to put the letter down and take off her glasses to wipe her eyes. "Oh, this is good," she said quietly, but her voice carried in the silent room. She looked directly at Benjamin, then at Veronica, then at Dorothy. "This is very good indeed." The confident smiles disappeared from their faces like someone had turned off a light switch. Benjamin's face went pale. Veronica's mouth fell open slightly. Dorothy's cold composure cracked, and for the first time in 8 years, she looked genuinely afraid. I felt a small smile tug at the corner of my mouth. Finally, after months of planning and preparing, it was time for them to learn the truth. 3 years ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. Benjamin would come home from work with flowers, kiss me at the door, and tell me how lucky he was to have me. We lived in his family's beautiful house on Maple Street, with its white columns and perfectly manicured lawn. I felt like a princess in a fairy tale. "Carmen, you don't need to worry about money," Benjamin said one evening as we sat at our dining room table. He was cutting his steak with precise movements, the way his mother had taught him. "I make enough for both of us. You should focus on making our home beautiful." I had been working at a small marketing company downtown, helping local businesses with their advertising. I loved my job, loved the creative challenges and the feeling of accomplishment when a campaign succeeded. But Benjamin had been hinting for months that I should quit. "But I enjoy working," I said, twirling my pasta around my fork. "And the extra money helps us save for our future." Benjamin set down his knife and looked at me with those dark eyes that used to make my heart skip. "Sweetheart, we don't need your little salary. It's barely enough to cover your gas and work clothes anyway. Wouldn't you rather spend your time making our home perfect? Maybe start planning for children?" The way he said, "little salary," made my cheeks burn. I made decent money, enough to pay for groceries and utilities. But when I looked around our expensive dining room, with its crystal chandelier and imported furniture, I felt small. Maybe he was right. Maybe my contribution didn't really matter. "I suppose I could take some time off," I said quietly. Benjamin's smile was brilliant. "That's my smart girl. You'll be so much happier at home." Within a month, I had quit my job. Benjamin took over all our finances, saying it would be easier if everything came from one account. He gave me a credit card for household expenses and told me to let him know if I needed anything else. At first, it felt nice to be taken care of. I spent my days decorating our home, cooking elaborate meals, and organizing Benjamin's business dinners. But slowly, things began to change. The credit card had a low limit, and Benjamin questioned every purchase. When I bought new curtains for the living room, he asked why I hadn't consulted him first. When I spent $50 on groceries, he wanted to see every receipt. "Carmen, we need to be more careful with money," he said one evening, going through the credit card statement with a red pen. "This coffee shop charge, what was that for?" "I met my friend Lisa for coffee," I said, feeling like a child being scolded. "It was only $8. $8 here, $12 there, it adds up. Maybe you should invite your friends here instead. It's more economical." I stopped meeting friends for coffee. Then I stopped buying new clothes without asking first. Then I stopped buying anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. Benjamin praised me for being so responsible, so understanding about our budget. But I noticed he still bought expensive suits and went out for business lunches that cost more than my entire weekly allowance. Dorothy made everything worse. Benjamin's mother visited every Sunday for dinner, and she always had something to say about how I was managing the house. The flowers in the garden weren't arranged properly. The dinner wasn't seasoned correctly. My dress was too casual for a foster family meal. "Benjamin, dear," she said one Sunday, cutting her roast beef into tiny pieces. "I saw the most lovely girl at the country club yesterday. Veronica Hayes, the interior designer. She's from such a good family, and her work is absolutely exquisite." Benjamin nodded politely, but I caught something in his expression. Interest, maybe. I've heard of her work. Very talented. You should hire her to redo the guest rooms, Dorothy continued, not looking at me. They could use a professional touch. I had spent weeks decorating those guest rooms, choosing colors and fabrics that I thought were beautiful. But sitting there listening to Dorothy, I felt like everything I did was wrong, amateur, not good enough for their family standards. That's a wonderful idea, Mother, Benjamin said. Carmen, what do you think? What could I say? That I wanted to keep the rooms I had worked so hard on? That hiring someone else felt like admitting I was a failure? Of course, I said with a smile that felt like plastic. Whatever you think is best. That's when the phone calls started. Benjamin would step outside to take calls, saying they were work-related. He started working late more often, coming home after I had already eaten dinner alone. When I asked about his day, his answers became shorter, less detailed. How was the Henderson project meeting? I asked one evening as he loosened his tie. Fine, he said, not looking at me. Just the usual client demands. But I had seen his calendar that morning when he left it on the kitchen counter. There was no Henderson meeting scheduled. There was a notation that said VH, 7 p.m., with a restaurant name I didn't recognize. I started paying attention to things I had ignored before, credit card statements that Benjamin quickly put away, phone calls that stopped when I entered the room, new cologne that smelled different from what he usually wore, shirts that came back from the dry cleaner with lipstick stains that weren't my shade. One evening, I was putting away his laundry when I found a receipt in his pants pocket. It was from an expensive restaurant downtown, dated the previous Tuesday. The bill was for 2 people, with champagne and dessert. But Tuesday night, Benjamin had told me he was working late on paperwork at the office. My hands shook as I held the receipt. The total was more than my monthly allowance. Someone had ordered the lobster and the chocolate souffle, dishes that Benjamin always said were too expensive when we looked at menus together. I sat on our bed, staring at that piece of paper, and felt something crack inside my chest. This wasn't about money or work stress or family pressure. This was about lies. This was about Benjamin living a completely different life when he wasn't with me. That night, when Benjamin came home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine, I didn't say anything. I smiled and asked about his day, and he told me about meetings that I now knew hadn't happened. I nodded and served him dinner and pretended everything was normal. But inside, I was already starting to plan. The next morning, I waited until Benjamin left for work before I got dressed. Instead of my usual routine of cleaning and organizing, I put on dark jeans and a baseball cap. I felt like a spy in a movie, except this was my real life falling apart. I drove to Benjamin's office building downtown and parked across the street where I could see the entrance. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. What was I doing? Following my own husband like some crazy person? But I had to know the truth. At 11:30, Benjamin walked out of the building. He wasn't alone. A woman with long blonde hair and a red coat walked beside him. She was beautiful in a way that made my stomach hurt. Tall, elegant, with perfect posture and expensive clothes. Everything I wasn't. They got into Benjamin's car together, laughing about something. The woman put her hand on his arm as they talked, and Benjamin smiled at her the way he used to smile at me. I followed them through the city streets, staying far enough back that they wouldn't notice me. They went to Romano's, the fancy Italian restaurant where Benjamin had taken me for our anniversary 2 years ago. The same restaurant where he told me we couldn't afford to eat anymore because we needed to save money. I watched through the window as they sat at a corner table, holding hands across the white tablecloth. The woman had to be Veronica Hayes, the interior designer Dorothy had mentioned. She was even more beautiful up close, with perfect makeup and jewelry that probably cost more than my car. She touched Benjamin's face gently, and he caught her hand and kissed her palm. My chest felt like someone was squeezing it with both hands. I sat in my car for 2 hours, watching them eat and laugh and act like a couple in love. When they finally left, Benjamin walked her to a silver BMW parked nearby. He kissed her goodbye, not a quick peck, but a real kiss that lasted long enough to make me look away. That evening, Benjamin came home at his usual time with a story about a difficult client meeting. He complained about how boring his day had been, how he wished he could have spent it with me instead. I nodded and smiled and served him the dinner I had somehow managed to cook while my world was crashing down. "How was your day, sweetheart?" he asked, cutting his chicken like nothing had happened. "Quiet," I said. I reorganized the closets and did some reading. "That's my good girl," he said, reaching over to pat my hand. "Always keeping busy." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my plate at the wall and demand to know who Veronica was and how long this had been going on. But instead, I squeezed his hand back and asked if he wanted dessert. Over the next few weeks, I became an expert at following them. I learned their routine. Lunch dates on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Evening meetings that were really dinner dates on Fridays. Weekend trips that Benjamin told me were business conferences. They went to art galleries and wine tastings and expensive shops where Veronica tried on clothes that cost more than I spent in 3 months. Benjamin bought her jewelry, flowers, and designer handbags. He paid for everything with credit cards I had never seen before. The worst part was watching how happy he looked with her. He laughed more in one afternoon with Veronica than he had with me in the past year. He held doors for her, pulled out her chair, and looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the world. All the things he used to do for me, back when our marriage was real. One Saturday, I followed them to the country club where Dorothy was a member. I parked outside and watched through the fence as they played tennis together. Dorothy was there too, sitting at a table on the patio, clapping when Veronica made a good shot. After the game, the three of them sat together having drinks. Dorothy was animated in a way I had never seen her, laughing and gesturing as she talked to Veronica. She touched Veronica's arm affectionately and nodded approvingly at everything she said. It was clear that Dorothy didn't just know about the affair, she was encouraging it. I drove home and sat in my empty house, finally understanding the truth. This wasn't just about Benjamin having an affair, this was about replacing me completely. Dorothy had found someone she considered worthy of her son, and they were all working together to push me out. That night, Benjamin came home with scratches on his arms from the tennis game. When I asked about them, he said he had been moving boxes at work and caught his arm on a nail. Another lie, told so easily that I wondered how many others I had believed over the years. "Benjamin," I said carefully, "your mother mentioned that interior designer again at dinner last week. Veronica Hayes. Have you thought about hiring her?" His face didn't change, but I caught a tiny pause before he answered. "Oh, right. I looked into it, but she's very expensive. Maybe next year when business picks up. She must be very talented to charge so much." "I suppose so. I haven't met her personally." Lie after lie after lie. I nodded and smiled and pretended to believe him, but inside I was taking notes. Every false story, every made-up excuse, every time he looked me in the eye and lied about where he had been and who he had been with. 2 months into my investigation, I realized something that changed everything. Benjamin wasn't just having an affair. He was planning to leave me for Veronica, but he wanted to make sure I got nothing in the divorce. All those conversations about money, all the restrictions on my spending, all the ways he had made me financially dependent, it was all part of a plan. He was going to divorce me and claim I had contributed nothing to our marriage. He would keep the house, the cars, the investments, everything. I would be left with nothing while he started his new life with Veronica and his mother's approval. But Benjamin had made one crucial mistake. He thought I was too weak and too stupid to fight back. He had no idea that I was watching, learning, and planning my own strategy. As I sat in our bedroom that night, listening to him sleep peacefully beside me, I made a decision. If Benjamin wanted to play games with money and lies, I would learn to play them better than he ever could. The next morning, I waited until Benjamin left for his client meeting that I knew was really brunch with Veronica. Then I did something I had never done before. I went into his home office and started looking through his papers. Benjamin's office was his private space, the one room in the house where I wasn't supposed to clean or organize. He kept it locked when he wasn't home, but I had seen him hide the key under his desk lamp months ago. My hands shook as I turned the key and stepped inside. The office was neat and organized, with filing cabinets along one wall and a large desk covered with papers. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I had to start somewhere. I began with the desk drawers, carefully looking through folders and documents. Most of it was boring business stuff that I didn't understand. Contracts for building projects, letters from clients, invoices for construction materials. But in the bottom drawer, I found something interesting. A folder labeled Personal Accounts that contained bank statements I had never seen before. Benjamin had 3 different bank accounts that I didn't know about. The statements showed huge amounts of money going in and out, much more than I thought his business made. There were deposits from companies I had never heard of, and withdrawals for cash amounts that seemed too large for normal expenses. I took pictures of everything with my phone, being careful to put each paper back exactly where I found it. My heart was beating so fast I felt dizzy, but I kept going. If Benjamin was hiding money from me, I needed to know how much and where it was. In the filing cabinet, I found more surprises. There were documents for a company called Foster Holdings LLC that Benjamin had never mentioned. According to the papers, this company owned several properties around the city, properties that Benjamin had told me belonged to his clients. One folder contained receipts for expensive purchases I didn't recognize: a watch that cost $15,000, a vacation to Hawaii that I had never taken, jewelry from stores I had never been to. All of these things were being paid for with money from accounts I didn't know existed. But the most shocking discovery was in a folder marked Legal Documents. Inside were papers from a lawyer I had never heard of, discussing something called asset protection strategies. The documents talked about moving money offshore and creating shell companies to hide wealth from potential creditors or legal claims. I didn't understand all the legal language, but I understood enough to know that Benjamin was hiding money on purpose. He was preparing for something, and I had a terrible feeling that something was our divorce. I spent 3 hours in that office, taking pictures of every document that seemed important. By the time I heard Benjamin's car in the driveway, I had locked everything back up and was in the kitchen making lunch like nothing had happened. "How was your meeting?" I asked as he kissed my cheek. "Productive," he said, loosening his tie. "The Johnson project is moving forward faster than expected." Another lie. I had seen his calendar, and there was no Johnson project, but I smiled and nodded and asked if he wanted a sandwich. That afternoon, I did something else I had never done before. I called my old friend Lisa, who worked as an accountant downtown. We had lost touch after I quit my job, but I hoped she would still help me. "Carmen," Lisa said when she answered the phone, "I haven't heard from you in forever. How are you?" "I'm okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Lisa, I need some advice about financial documents. Could we meet for coffee?" "Of course. Is everything all right? You sound worried." "I'll explain when I see you." We met at a small cafe across town, far from anywhere Benjamin might go. Lisa looked the same as always, with her curly red hair and friendly smile. But when I showed her the pictures on my phone, her expression became serious. "Carmen, where did you get these documents?" she asked, scrolling through the images. "They're my husband's business papers. I found them in his office." Lisa was quiet for a long time, studying each picture carefully. Finally, she looked up at me with concern in her eyes. "Carmen, some of these transactions look very suspicious. These shell companies, the offshore accounts, the cash withdrawals, this looks like money laundering." "Money laundering?" I repeated. "What does that mean?" "It means taking money from illegal activities and making it look legal by moving it through different accounts and companies. It's a serious crime." My stomach dropped. "Are you sure?" "I'm not a criminal investigator, but I've seen enough financial fraud cases to recognize the patterns." "Look at this," she said, pointing to one of the bank statements. "Your husband receives large cash deposits from companies that don't seem to exist. Then he moves that money through several different accounts before it ends up in offshore banks. That's classic money laundering behavior." I felt like the room was spinning. "What should I do?" "You need to talk to someone who specializes in financial crimes. I know a detective who works on these kinds of cases. His name is Antonio Rivera, and he's very good at his job. Would you like me to give you his number?" I nodded, unable to speak. Lisa wrote down the detective's information on a napkin and handed it to me. "Carmen, be very careful," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "If your husband is involved in money laundering, he could be dangerous. Don't let him know that you've discovered anything." I drove home in a daze, the detective's phone number burning in my pocket. Benjamin was in his office when I got back, probably moving more illegal money around while I made dinner. I cooked and cleaned and acted normal, but inside I was terrified. That night, as Benjamin slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process what I had learned. My husband wasn't just cheating on me and planning to leave me with nothing. He was a criminal who had been using our marriage as a cover for illegal activities. But for the first time in months, I felt something other than fear and sadness. I felt angry. Benjamin had lied to me about everything, stolen from me, and planned to destroy my life. But now I had information that could destroy his life instead. Tomorrow I would call Detective Rivera. Tomorrow I would start fighting back. The next morning, I waited until Benjamin left for work before I dialed Detective Rivera's number. My hands were shaking so badly I had to try 3 times before I got all the digits right. Detective Rivera, Financial Crimes Unit. A deep voice answered. "Hello," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Carmen Foster. Lisa Martinez gave me your number. I think my husband might be doing something illegal with money." There was a pause. "Mrs. Foster, can you come to the station this afternoon? I'd like to discuss this in person." 2 hours later, I sat in a small office at the police station, facing a man in his 40s with kind eyes and graying hair. Detective Rivera had the pictures from my phone spread across his desk, studying them with a serious expression. "Mrs. Foster, how long has your husband been involved in these financial activities?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "I just found these papers yesterday. I had no idea any of this existed." Detective Rivera nodded. "That's common in these cases. Spouses often have no knowledge of their partner's illegal activities." He pointed to one of the bank statements. "These transactions show a clear pattern of money laundering. Your husband is receiving large amounts of cash from questionable sources and moving it through multiple accounts to hide its origin." "What kind of questionable sources?" I asked. "Based on these amounts and patterns, probably drug money, illegal gambling, or other organized crime activities. Your husband's real estate business provides perfect cover for laundering dirty money through property purchases and sales." I felt sick. How long could he go to prison for this? Money laundering is a federal crime. Depending on the amounts involved, he could face 10 to 20 years in prison, plus massive fines and forfeiture of all assets purchased with illegal money. "All assets?" I repeated. "Everything. The house, cars, bank accounts, investments. If they were purchased with laundered money, the government will seize them." My mind was racing. If Benjamin went to prison and lost everything, what would happen to me? I would have nothing, just like he had planned. Except now it would be because he was a criminal, not because he had outsmarted me in divorce court. "Detective Rivera," I said slowly, "what if I helped you build a case against him? What if I could get more evidence?" He leaned back in his chair, studying my face. "Mrs. Foster, that would be very dangerous. If your husband suspected you were investigating him, he could become violent. These aren't the kind of people who handle betrayal well." "But I'm already in danger, aren't I? If he's involved with criminals, if he's planning to divorce me and leave me with nothing, I'm not safe anyway." Detective Rivera was quiet for a long moment. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I have access to his office, his computer, his files. I could copy more documents, record conversations, maybe even find out who he's working with. But I would need protection, and I would need guarantees about what happens to me when this is over." "What kind of guarantees?" "I want immunity from any charges related to his crimes. I want protection if he tries to hurt me. And I want to keep some of the assets that were purchased with legitimate money from his real estate business." Detective Rivera smiled for the first time since I had arrived. "Mrs. Foster, you're thinking like a prosecutor. Let me make some calls and see what we can arrange." 3 days later, I met with Detective Rivera and a federal prosecutor named Sarah Chen. They had prepared an official cooperation agreement that gave me everything I had asked for in exchange for my help building a case against Benjamin. "Mrs. Foster," Prosecutor Chen explained, "you'll be working as a confidential informant. We'll provide you with recording devices and teach you how to gather evidence safely. But you must understand the risks. If your husband discovers what you're doing, you could be in serious physical danger." "I understand," I said, signing the papers with a steady hand. "When do we start?" Over the next 2 months, I became a different person. During the day, I played the role of the obedient wife, cooking and cleaning and asking Benjamin about his day. But every moment he was out of the house, I was working. I installed tiny recording devices in his office and car. I copied files from his computer onto flash drives. I photographed every document I could find, building a complete picture of his illegal activities. The evidence was overwhelming. Benjamin was laundering money for a drug trafficking organization run by a man named Carlos Mendez. He would receive cash payments of $50,000 to $100,000, then use his real estate company to purchase properties with that money. Later, he would sell the properties and deposit the proceeds into legitimate bank accounts, making the drug money appear clean. But Benjamin had gotten greedy. Instead of just taking his percentage for laundering the money, he had been skimming extra cash for himself. He used this stolen money to fund his affair with Veronica, buying her expensive gifts and taking her on lavish trips. I recorded conversations where Benjamin bragged to his business partner about how easy it was to fool the authorities. I photographed meetings where he received briefcases full of cash from dangerous-looking men. I documented every transaction, every lie, every crime. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal when Benjamin came home each night. He would kiss me and tell me about his day, making up stories about legitimate business deals while I knew he had spent the afternoon with drug dealers and criminals. "You seem different lately," he said one evening as we ate dinner. "More confident, maybe. I like it." "I've been reading more," I said, which was true. I had been reading everything I could find about money laundering and financial crimes, learning new things. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Knowledge is power." If only he knew how much knowledge I had gained and how I planned to use that power against him. By the end of 2 months, Detective Rivera told me we had enough evidence to arrest Benjamin and seize all his assets, but I asked for 1 more week. I wanted to be in that divorce court when Benjamin thought he had won everything. I wanted to see his face when he realized that his perfect plan had been destroyed by the wife he thought was too stupid to fight back. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for Benjamin to walk into it. The divorce proceedings began on a cold Tuesday morning in November. I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, wearing a simple black dress that made me look smaller and more helpless than I felt. Benjamin arrived with his team of expensive lawyers, all of them carrying thick briefcases and wearing confident smiles. "Good morning, Carmen," Benjamin said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "I hope we can get through this quickly and amicably." I nodded meekly, playing my part perfectly. "I just want what's fair, Benjamin." He patted my shoulder like I was a child. "Of course you do, sweetheart. Don't worry, I'll make sure you're taken care of." Veronica arrived a few minutes later, wearing a stunning blue suit that probably cost more than I used to make in a month. She sat in the gallery behind Benjamin, her presence a clear message about who would be taking my place. Dorothy sat beside her, the two of them whispering and smiling like old friends planning a celebration. When we entered the courtroom, Benjamin's lead lawyer, Mr. Harrison, immediately took control. He was a tall man with silver hair and an expensive watch, the kind of lawyer who charged $1,000 an hour and won cases through intimidation. "Your Honor," Mr. Harrison began, "this is a straightforward case. My client, Mr. Benjamin Foster, is a successful businessman who has supported his wife for 8 years. Mrs. Foster has no work experience, no education beyond high school, and has made no financial contributions to the marriage. She is seeking an unreasonable settlement that would cripple my client's business and livelihood." Judge Hawkins listened without expression as Mr. Harrison presented their case. They had charts showing Benjamin's income, graphs demonstrating my lack of contribution, and testimony from character witnesses who painted me as a gold digger who had trapped an innocent man. Dorothy took the witness stand first, wearing a navy suit and pearls that made her look like the perfect society matron. She spoke in a clear, confident voice about how I had never fit into their family. Benjamin tried so hard to help Carmen improve herself, Dorothy testified. He paid for etiquette classes, bought her appropriate clothing, even hired tutors to help her learn about art and culture. But she showed no interest in bettering herself or supporting Benjamin's career. Every word was a lie, but Dorothy delivered them with such conviction that I almost believed them myself. Benjamin had never paid for any classes or tutors. The only thing he had paid for was my silence and submission. Mrs. Foster has no understanding of the social obligations that come with being married to a man of Benjamin's standing, Dorothy continued. She embarrassed him at business functions and refused to participate in charitable activities. Frankly, I'm surprised the marriage lasted as long as it did. Mr. Harrison nodded approvingly. Thank you, Mrs. Foster. No further questions. My lawyer, Mr. Peterson, stood up for cross-examination, but he looked nervous and unprepared. Mrs. Foster, isn't it true that your son controlled all the finances in the marriage? Benjamin managed the money because he's good with finances, Dorothy replied smoothly. Carmen showed no interest in learning about such things. And isn't it true that you encouraged your son's relationship with Miss Hayes? Dorothy's eyes flashed with anger. I have no idea what you're implying. Mr. Peterson sat down quickly, clearly outmatched. I wanted to scream at him to fight harder, but I reminded myself that this was all part of the plan. Next, Benjamin took the witness stand. He looked handsome and sincere in his dark suit, every inch the successful businessman who had been taken advantage of by his greedy wife. Your Honor, Benjamin said, his voice full of sadness, I loved Carmen deeply, but our marriage became impossible. She had no interest in building a life together or supporting my career. She spent money frivolously and refused to take responsibility for household management. I tried to help her, but she seemed content to live off my hard work without contributing anything in return. Mr. Harrison guided Benjamin through a detailed account of our marriage that bore no resemblance to reality. In Benjamin's version, I was lazy, selfish, and financially irresponsible. He was the long-suffering husband who had tried everything to save our marriage. I'm asking for a modest settlement that will allow Carmen to start fresh, Benjamin concluded. A small monthly allowance and perhaps some job training to help her become self-sufficient. I bear her no ill will, but I can't continue to support someone who refuses to support herself. The courtroom was silent when Benjamin finished. Even I had to admit he was convincing. If I didn't know the truth about his crimes and affairs, I might have believed him myself. Veronica never testified, but her presence in the courtroom spoke volumes. She sat behind Benjamin like a queen waiting to claim her throne, occasionally touching his shoulder or whispering encouragement in his ear. Dorothy beamed at her with obvious approval. When it was my turn to testify, I played my part perfectly. I spoke quietly about how I had tried to be a good wife, how I had managed our household and supported Benjamin's career in ways that didn't show up on financial statements. But even to my own ears, I sounded weak and unconvincing. Mr. Harrison's cross-examination was brutal. He made me admit that I had no income, no savings, and no job skills. He questioned every expense I had made, every decision I had taken, until I felt like a criminal on trial for the crime of being financially dependent. By the end of the day, it was clear that Benjamin had won. His lawyers were smiling, Veronica was practically glowing, and Dorothy looked like she was already planning the wedding reception. But I wasn't worried. Tomorrow, Judge Hawkins would read my letter, and everything would change. I sat in that cold wooden chair, watching Benjamin whisper his cruel words about never touching his money again. Veronica's sweet voice calling him sweetheart made my skin crawl, but I kept my face blank. Dorothy's declaration that I didn't deserve a cent should have hurt, but instead it filled me with satisfaction. They had no idea what was coming. Mr. Peterson stood up with shaking hands, pulling out the white envelope that contained 2 months of careful planning. Your Honor, I have one final piece of evidence to present on behalf of my client. Mrs. Foster has prepared a letter for the court's consideration. Benjamin's confident smile faltered slightly. His lawyers looked confused, whispering among themselves about evidence they hadn't been told about. Veronica shifted in her seat, her perfect posture becoming less perfect. Dorothy's cold eyes narrowed as she watched the envelope make its way to Judge Hawkins. Judge Hawkins opened the envelope carefully and began to read. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat. I watched her face as her eyes moved across the pages, seeing the moment when her expression changed from mild interest to shock to something that looked like delight. She read for what felt like forever. Benjamin was staring at me now, trying to figure out what I could possibly have written that would matter. He still looked confident, but there was worry creeping into his dark eyes, the same eyes that had lied to me for years. When Judge Hawkins finished reading, she looked up at Benjamin, then at Veronica, then at Dorothy. Then she started to laugh. Not a polite chuckle, but a real, deep laugh that echoed off the walls. She laughed so hard she had to take off her glasses and wipe her eyes. "Oh, this is good," she said quietly, her voice carrying in the silent room. "This is very good indeed." The confident smiles disappeared from their faces, like someone had turned off a light switch. Benjamin's face went pale. Veronica's mouth fell open. Dorothy's cold composure cracked for the first time in 8 years. Judge Hawkins composed herself and looked directly at Benjamin. "Mr. Foster, according to this letter, your wife has been working with federal investigators for the past 2 months. She has provided extensive evidence of your money laundering operation, including recordings, photographs, and financial documents." Benjamin shot to his feet. "That's impossible! She doesn't know anything about my business." "Sit down, Mr. Foster," Judge Hawkins said sharply. "According to Detective Antonio Rivera of the Financial Crimes Unit, you have been laundering money for a drug trafficking organization. You've been skimming funds from your criminal associates and using that money to finance an extramarital affair." Veronica gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Benjamin, what is she talking about?" "The jewelry, the trips, the expensive dinners," Judge Hawkins continued, reading from my letter, "all paid for with stolen drug money. Miss Hayes, you might want to contact a lawyer. Accepting gifts purchased with proceeds from criminal activity can make you an accessory to money laundering." Veronica's face went white. She looked at Benjamin with horror, realizing that everything he had given her was evidence of serious crimes. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I had no idea." Dorothy stood up, her voice shaking with rage. "This is ridiculous. My son is a respected businessman." "Mrs. Foster," Judge Hawkins said, looking at Dorothy with disgust, "your son faces federal charges for money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy. The government will be seizing all assets purchased with illegal funds, which appears to include the family home, vehicles, and most of his business holdings." Benjamin's lawyer was frantically whispering in his ear, but Benjamin pushed him away. "Carmen, you don't understand what you've done. These people don't forgive betrayal. You've put yourself in danger." I stood up slowly, feeling stronger than I had in years. "I understand perfectly, Benjamin. I understand that you're a criminal who used our marriage as a cover for illegal activities. I understand that you planned to leave me with nothing while you started a new life with stolen money, and I understand that you underestimated me completely." Judge Hawkins smiled. "Mrs. Foster, as a cooperating witness in a federal investigation, you are entitled to protection and compensation. The government has agreed to allow you to keep all assets that can be proven to have been purchased with legitimate income from Mr. Foster's real estate business." "How much?" Benjamin asked desperately. "According to the financial analysis, approximately 40% of your assets came from legitimate business income. Mrs. Foster will receive those assets plus spousal support, plus a reward from the federal government for her cooperation in this investigation." Benjamin sank into his chair, the reality finally hitting him. He had lost everything: his business, his money, his freedom, and his future with Veronica. All because he had assumed his wife was too weak and stupid to fight back. Veronica was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks as she realized her dreams of wealth and status were crumbling. Dorothy sat in stunned silence, watching her family's reputation destroyed in a matter of minutes. Furthermore, Judge Hawkins continued, "Federal agents are waiting outside this courtroom to arrest Mr. Foster on charges of money laundering, conspiracy, and tax evasion. This divorce proceeding is suspended pending the outcome of criminal charges." The courtroom doors opened, and Detective Rivera walked in with 2 other agents. Benjamin looked at me one last time, his face a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You have no idea what you've done, Carmen." "I know exactly what I've done," I said calmly. "I've taken my life back." As the agents handcuffed Benjamin and read him his rights, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. For 8 years, I had been living a lie, married to a man who saw me as nothing more than a convenient cover for his crimes. Veronica fled the courtroom, probably already calling lawyers to distance herself from Benjamin's criminal activities. Dorothy followed her, the two women who had planned to celebrate my destruction now facing their own ruin. I walked out of that courtroom a free woman, financially secure and emotionally liberated. Benjamin had taught me that knowledge was power, but he never imagined I would use that lesson against him. The weak, helpless wife he had created was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who had learned to fight back and who had won.